In the sweltering heat of the southern summer of 1850, beneath a sky so heavy with moisture, it seemed the heavens might weep, Sarah and Elijah lived a love that defied the ruthless codes of bondage. Their union was a secret whispered in shadows, where every stolen glance carried the weight of forbidden hope. Around them, eyes, sharp and unyielding, watched for any sign of defiance, their vigilance a constant river of danger flowing through the plantation's forbidding grounds. How could two souls intertwine in a world designed to keep them apart, where even the faintest promise of union was outlawed and punishable like a crime? Their love, a fragile thread woven through with tension, grew quietly amidst the relentless toil and cruelty of plantation life. The rhythm of their days was dictated by overseers' calls, harsh commands slicing through dawn's humid air, and the ceaseless groan of cotton fields under the weight of hundreds of laboring bodies. Each dawn brought exhaustion etched in the lines of their faces, yet faith persisted in the spaces between drudgery and despair. Would the soft brush of their hands or a whispered vow ignite hope or doom? The oppressive laws forbade marriage or any formal union, stripping enslaved people of even the simplest dignity, the right to mark a bond between hearts. Sarah's breath often caught, a fragile flutter beneath the rough fabrics of her worn dress, layered over skin heated by sun and hardship. Her fingers, calloused yet gentle, traced the coarse edges of hemp ropes, their harsh texture a reminder of chains and confinement, but also a silent symbol of the marriage she and Elijah dared to dream. Elijah's gaze was steady but haunted, a flicker of resolve, shadowed by the ever-present threat of discovery. Their secret meetings were punctuated by the soft scrape of wooden floors beneath hidden cabins and the faint scent of lamp oil lingering in dim corners where few dared look. Would their love withstand the weight of law and the ever-watchful eyes of the overseer's gaze? Whispers rounded corners and slipped through cracks between planks, carrying rumors that could unravel their carefully threaded defiance. The plantation breathed around them, a living entity of judgment, cruelty, and silence. As the couple's vows loomed like a storm yet to break, the air thickened with anticipation and dread. The possibility of ceremony was a defiant flame flickering against the suffocating shadows of the law. Each night, the cadence of muffled prayers and stolen moments felt like a heartbeat racing against the inevitable. Could love carved out in secrecy truly withstand the cold iron of oppression? As the sun slipped below the horizon, a silent question settled like dust in the heavy air. When hope clashes with law, which will prevail? Their resolve solidified quietly, a slow tightening like the twine binding a precious bundle. Defiance was not an act of recklessness, but a fragile courage born in the desperate quiet of those who had learned to endure unspeakable scars. The texture of rope, once a mere instrument of restraint, transformed under their hands into a sacred emblem of union, a simultaneity of captivity and connection. Their whispered vows, scarcely louder than the rustling of dry leaves and shifting earth, bore an unspoken pledge to one another and a flickering challenge to the unforgiving world around them. Would this fragile rebellion kindle a conflagration or smother in the ashes of shattered dreams? In the spaces between these stolen moments, the plantation's omnipresent tension tightened like the slow creak of an old hinge, refusing to yield. The law cast a long, merciless shadow over Sarah and Elijah's union, a reminder that their love was not merely forbidden, but punishable with cruelty unimaginable. Each glance was a reckoning, each whispered promise a defiance of a system built to deny their humanity. The heavy weight of anticipation pressed upon them, palpable in the quickened pulse beneath rough-spun cloth and the rigid stillness of hands clasped in stolen embrace. In the face of this stark reality, would their hope illuminate the darkness or be swallowed whole by it? The heavy, humid air seemed to hold its breath as they prepared to defy a world intent on unmaking them. Their love, delicate as spun silk and as strong as iron chains, was an act of rebellion etched in every trembling breath. The texture of rough hemp, the faint scent of earth and sweat, the low murmur of promises whispered beneath a constellation of watchful stars. This was their clandestine covenant, their last fragile sanctuary before the shadows closed in. What cost would their union demand? And in a world where love was shackled, What price would freedom claim? Bound by law, yet buoyed by love, Sarah and Elijah stood on the precipice of defiance, their secret union a flickering light against a sky heavy with looming storm clouds. As the weight of their forbidden love settled around them like the coarse fibers of rope, binding and defining, they moved forward, knowing the peril woven into every stolen vow. What aftermath awaited those who dared to intertwine hearts in chains? The answer lingered in the thick, breathless silence of the plantation night, where hope and risk danced hand in hand. The texture of rough hemp rope, scratchy yet supple, became the unlikely thread binding Sarah and Elijah's courage to a fragile hope. In the heart of the sweltering plantation summer, where heavy air dragged like thick wool over their skins, they fashioned a clandestine ceremony. Every grain of dust in the dim cabin danced like silent witnesses as the couple prepared to weave their fates together. This was no grand affair, but a whispered defiance, one bead of sacred ritual rolled quietly over the coarse fibers of oppression. Their union took shape through simple acts, a knot tied in secrecy, a shared breath held between two worlds. The rope, intended for binding and punishment, was repurposed here as a symbol of communion, a fragile tether between souls shackled by law. The scent of lamp oil mingled with the faint sweat on their brows, mingling with the cautious, reverent murmurs that escaped like prayer beneath the cotton canopy's looming shadows. Each twist of fiber was a heartbeat suspended between tragedy and hope. What power could such a modest ritual wield within a world built to deny their very humanity? The ceremony's quiet intimacy was a fragile fortress amidst the watchful plantation eyes. Beyond the weathered planks sealing their hidden space, the sound of distant calls and shifting footsteps was a relentless reminder of the peril bound to discovery. Sarah's fingers trembled as they smoothed the fabric of Elijah's worn shirt, that threadbare cloth worn thin by back-breaking labor and sunburns. Her gaze shifted to the knot they tied, small yet fierce, a symbol casting a fragile glow in the growing darkness. Would this small act of rebellion withstand the inevitable storm gathering on the horizon? The couple shared stolen words, wrapped tightly as the rope around their clasped hands, binding promises forged in shadows where law and love collided. Accounts suggest that enslaved weddings, although illegal, provided fleeting sanctuaries of hope within the cruel plantation order. The illicit ceremony was a silent resistance, a refusal to be erased by laws that forbade connection. Their vows lingered in the damp night air, brief flickers of warmth amid the encroaching chill of oppression. Would these whispered words be washed away by coming violence, or would they ignite a blaze too fierce to be quelled? As hands bound by rope tightened, so too did the grip of the plantation's gaze. The sound of a distant overseer's bark rose and fell like a malevolent tide, threatening to sweep away the fragile sanctuary. Will the ritual be discovered? And if so, what price will these two pay for daring to claim each other in defiance of every law forged to keep them apart? In this act of union, love and resistance became indistinguishable. Each knot tied a stitch in the fabric of rebellion. The rope, once a symbol of submission, had become their secret anthem, echoing through the darkest hours yet to come. The plantation's air hummed with secrets, like the low clinking of chains underfoot, as whispers trickled between the enslaved quarters. Sarah and Elijah's union, though tender and private, had woven itself into a tapestry of hushed rumor and cautious anticipation. Their love, once a silent ember, now felt like a quiet blaze in the underbrush, dangerous and infectious. The long hours toiling under the scalding sun drained bodies, but it was these whispered stories that breathed life into weary spirits. Could love spark revolution, even when all forces conspired to snuff it out? The simmering unease settled like a heat haze over the cotton fields, where rows of bowed figures marched in mechanical rhythm, overseers' shouts slicing the heavy air. The weight of the law pressed down harder with every furtive glance exchanged between slaves, their furtive meetings like footfalls in deep shadows. The plantation owner had long wielded marriage laws as shackles of control. No slave could claim union without his sanction, and any act of defiance risked brutal punishment. The thin line between hope and terror wavered like the flicker of a candle flame threatened by a sudden draft. What would happen if the owner confronted this most insidious rebellion? Elijah's jaw tightened as the overseer's shadow fell near, the scrape of leather boots against hardened earth, a grim reminder. His hands clenched instinctively, rough palms rougher beneath dirt and toil. Sarah's heart pounded in sync, each beat echoing a silent plea for safety. Rumors swelled like gathering storm clouds. Some whispered that loyalty among the enslaved was fracturing, others that solidarity was weaving stronger than ever. The plantation's walls, both physical and invisible, seemed to constrict tighter as fear and hope wove together. Would their defiance inspire others, or provoke a violent end to what fragile peace remained? The faint clap of a distant door closing reverberated like a verdict. In these moments framed by rustling leaves and distant crows' cries, the plantation was no longer just a place, but a battleground. Every whispered secret, every stolen smile, was an act of rebellion against a world built to erase identity, love, and choice. The knowledge that the law forbade these unions only deepened their resolve, a tightrope walk on a razor's edge between hope's fragile promise and the looming shadow of ruin. Can one forged in secrecy truly withstand the siege of loyalty and fear? As shadows lengthened across the tobacco fields, the tension coiled tighter, a silent storm waiting to break. The narrative of their union was no longer theirs alone. It had become the pulse within a community yearning for change. Would their love survive the growing tempest, or become the spark that set the plantation aflame? The weight of this whispered rebellion settled like the rough fibers of rope around their wrists, binding hope and dread in equal measure, foreshadowing a reckoning both intimate and explosive. Within the rigid frame of 1850 slave codes, Sarah and Elijah's bond was more than forbidden. It was a direct affront to a system that denied the very humanity of enslaved people. These laws rendered marriages between slaves not only illegal, but unthinkable, stripping them of rights to form unions recognized by church or state. The law's cold hand reached into their lives, dictating not merely their labor, but the most intimate ties of flesh and soul. Each tactile brush of coarse fabric against sunburned skin was a reminder of the invisible chains tightening around their hopes. The plantation owner wielded his authority like a specter, enforcing the brutal logic that slaves were property, not persons. Records imply that anywhere from harsh punishments to outright separation awaited those who dared to claim union. Overseers with whips and watchful eyes worked to fracture connections, sending families into cruel dispersion through sale or forced relocation. Elijah's rough hands curled into fists beneath the sun's fierce glare, as the weight of inevitable violence pressed closer. Could love flourish where law decreed only cruelty? What refuge remained for hearts branded by both desire and despair? The plantation's shadows ran deep, thickened by the shuffling steps of overseers and the ever-present risk of betrayal. The texture of iron shackles loomed as constant threats, icons of oppressive power designed to break spirit and body alike. Sarah, mindful of every whispered sound and footfall, held close not only Elijah's hand, but the flickering flame of defiance that dared to challenge fate. Their fleeting moments together, swathed in hushed secrets and rough-hewn promises, stood as sanctuaries amid the swirling storm of watchfulness and control. Would the law's harsh judgment extinguish this fragile ember, or ignite resistance beyond all reckoning? The air crept heavy with a silent tension, each breath drawn thick with the scent of sweat, dust, and distant smoke. The law had no place for love in bonds forged by slaveholders' design, only the cold calculus of ownership and profit. For Sarah and Elijah, every stolen moment was both an act of survival and rebellion. Their union was woven with the same coarse fibers from which shackles were forged. In the long shadow of injustice, they stood tethered not just by rope or decree, but by a fierce and dangerous hope. Will the binding of rope become the emblem of subjugation, or the symbol of their unyielding will to resist? Amid the relentless gaze of the plantation's overseers, Sarah and Elijah found a rare refuge, the sanctuary of whispered prayers in the small, dim-lit cabin, where a preacher, himself an enslaved man, cloaked in furtive reverence, offered a fragile shield against the encroaching shadows. The flicker of a single tallow candle cast long, trembling shapes onto rough wood walls, the scent of smoke weaving through the heavy air like an elusive hope. Here, amid the scent of damp earth and worn cloth, defiance nestled quietly in ritual and faith. The preacher's voice was low and measured, a murmured cadence that seemed to slow the heavy pace of time. His words, sometimes scripture, sometimes the echoes of clandestine gospel songs, wove through the cramped space like a balm stitching together fragmented spirits. For Sarah and Elijah, these moments were more than spiritual. They were acts of resistance, small sanctuaries carved out within a world that sought to erase their existence. The preacher, who had seen many fragile unions rise and fall under the weight of ownership, embodied the conflicted truth of faith entwined with bondage. Would divine hope outlast the iron will of a merciless master? In this secret sanctuary, the texture of rough wooden benches bore silent witness to vows exchanged far from any legal recognition, but no less real for their lack of sanction. The touch of weathered hands joined in prayer, the feather-light brush of fabric, the muffled creak of old boards beneath shifting feet, all these threaded a tapestry of quiet courage. Yet the omnipresent tension pressed close, like a draft slipping beneath the cabin door, reminding all that sanctuary was precarious. Could the plantation's watchful eyes breach this veil of sacredness, shattering what little peace these stolen moments brought? The weight of law and custom outside these walls contrasted with the fragile bonds within. Records suggest that clergy, whether enslaved or rare sympathetic outsiders, risked much in presiding over such unions, often performing rites in secret or under veiled circumstances. Sarah and Elijah's unshackled spirits found temporary reprieve, even as outside forces tightened like a noose. Would these rare rituals plant the seeds of broader defiance, or simply mark another chapter in a long narrative of hopes dashed by merciless power? As the flickering candle waned, the silence that followed was thick with unspoken fears. This hidden chapel held no promise of permanence, but within its four walls, the spark of rebellion glowed steady. The harsh world beyond, with its sharp commands and brutal punishments, awaited like a gathering storm. Yet here love and faith intertwined, a secret sanctuary precariously perched between hope and peril, whispering stories still too dangerous to fully tell. The day of their secret union arrived beneath a sky pregnant with storm, heavy clouds casting a gray pall over the plantation like a harbinger of inevitable upheaval. Sarah and Elijah stood close, their hands bound together by the rough hemp rope, a fragile, defiant symbol of both their love and their chains. Every breath tasted of sweat and anticipation. The air was thick with the mingled scents of dust, wet earth, and the faint musk of worn cloth. Around them, the hushed gathering of trusted souls held a tension so taut it vibrated in the silence before their whispered vows. Their altar was a simple wooden table, scarred by years of labor and the weight of cruel authority. The preacher murmured words stolen from sacred texts, but more from hope and longing, binding the couple in vows no law would recognize. The texture of the rope tightened as Sarah and Elijah clasped hands, their fingers intertwining with an urgency born of knowing the cost should discovery come. A church bell in the distance tolled slowly, its tone a solemn heartbeat against the mounting silence. Would this quiet act of union stand unbroken, or become the spark that ignited a conflagration none could contain? Before promises could fully take root, a sudden crash shattered the fragile bubble, a harsh voice demanding the cessation of their rights. The plantation owner's figure emerged from shadows, his arrival as cruel and sudden as the lash of a whip. Screams cracked through the air, the rough scrape of boots on wooden floors, the snap of rope, and the sharp clang of iron against flesh. The altar, once a place of hope, became soaked in blood as violence erupted like a savage storm. Every whispered vow fractured immediately into desperate cries for survival. What fury could a love forbidden by law unleash in those desperate moments? Elijah's eyes, wide with shock, darted between rising smoke and the bloodied faces of those who had gathered. Sarah's trembling hands reached for him as chaos swallowed their sanctuary whole. The massacre that followed was not merely a reaction, but a powerful primal reclaiming of agency, a sudden uprising fueled by years of silence and repression. Their defiant love in this brutal crucible became a furious declaration that the ties among the enslaved could not be severed without dire consequence. What price would the plantation pay for underestimating the power of bound hearts? As chaos gave way to flight and smoke curled against the darkening sky, the blood-stained rope remained, gnarled and soaked, an eternal testament both to love's fragile strength and the brutal cost of defiance. This moment, searing and irrevocable, shattered the plantation's fragile order and echoed through the lives of all who dared to dream beyond the chains. Would this sacrificial blaze transform despair into hope, or simply herald a harsher dawn? The rope, soaked in both love and loss, bound them forever in history's reckoning. Smoke thickened the air like a suffocating veil as Sarah, Elijah, and the handful of survivors fled the blazing plantation beneath darkening storm clouds. Their lungs burned, filled with the acrid sting of smoke and ash, while the rough bark of oak scratched at arms and faces in frantic, stumbling flight. The heat radiated from the flames like a cruel breath, warping the horizon into a wavering mirage of fire and ruin. Each thudding heartbeat echoed the jagged rhythm of desperate escape, the texture of fear sharper than any whip. The crackling of burning timbers mingled with the sharp clatter of pursuit, overseers' shouts slicing through rain-soaked woods like steel blades. Their footsteps pounded a relentless drumbeat against the sodden earth, leaves crushed beneath frantic feet while thunder growled overhead. Elijah's hand tightened around Sarah's, calloused fingers clinging to more than flesh, clinging to hope threaded through terror. The tactile sensation of slick mud sucked at shoes, slow and treacherous, but surrender was no option. Would they outrun the storm of wrath and law, or be swallowed in the inferno rising behind? Around them, the air was thick with the scent of smoke, rain, and wet earth, a heady mix that blurred the line between survival and suffocation. Their breaths came ragged, clouds of vapor against the cold night air, while the phosphorescent flicker of flames painted their faces in stark relief. Each glance over a shoulder was a gamble. Shadows loomed like hunters, and every snapped twig underfoot threatened to betray their fleeting sanctuary. The landscape itself seemed to pulse with menace and urgency. How far could love propel fugitives through such hellish terrain before hope dissolved into despair? As the forest swallowed their flight, fleeting whispers of loyalty and loss tangled like vines in their minds. The world they knew, marked by oppression, law, and blood, receded behind a veil of smoke that refused to settle. They carried with them the bitter knowledge that refuge would be temporary, the chase relentless. The fire that consumed the plantation was both savior and executioner, a consuming purge, burning away old chains, but threatening to consume all. Unlike the flames, their resolve remained fierce, unshackled hearts pounding against the dark, demanding a dawn they had never been promised. Through biting rain and searing flame, Sarah and Elijah vanished into the night, their story woven now into the landscape's scars and whispered legend. The firelight faded, but the fierce pulse of love and rebellion blazed on, an ember against the cold weight of history, holding fast amidst ashes and shadows. The smoke had barely settled when stories began to ripple through the enslaved quarters, oral histories whispered beneath the shrouded canopy of secrecy. Where official records offered cold silences or brutal accounts of suppression, the voices of survivors cast fragile, flickering light over a scene fractured by trauma and memory. These tales wove together sorrow and defiance, painting a tapestry shaped by both what was recorded and what was deliberately erased. Would the truth lie in fractured memories or in the brittle pages of plantation ledgers? Survivors recounted the chaos with tremulous breaths, the roar of flames engulfing wood and hopes alike, the crack of whips splintering the heavy night air, the desperate scramble to escape death's shadow. Each narrative bore subtle differences, as if the story itself were a living thing, stretching and contracting with the pain it contained. Sometimes the voices sang hymns of endurance. At others they spoke in whispered laments for lost kin. In that tension rested the eternal struggle between memory and erasure. How does one hold fast to identity when even history threatens to dissolve it? Official accounts, silent or skewed, sought to quell the destructive power of rebellion with legal brutality and harsh reprisals. Yet the oral tradition thrived stubbornly in the gaps. The preacher, the doctor, the gossip, they became the custodians of truth, their voices layering into a rich, if contested, archive. Their fragmented testimonies painted a picture of a community shattered but unbroken, a people who refused the final severing of their bonds. Would these stories endure as sparks to kindle future resistance, or be condemned to the shadows alongside those who lived them? The tension between recorded fact and oral legend echoed through every whispered retelling. The plantation's aftermath was not merely a record of violence, but a complex terrain of contested histories, where hope and bitterness coexisted, where trauma lived side by side with dreams of freedom. The ash carried more than death. It bore the seeds of remembrance, whispered promises that even erasure could not extinguish. What weight does memory hold when weighed against the cold sentence of history's pen? The fragile flame of truth flickers on, even in the darkest aftermath. As twilight surrendered to an ominous night, a clandestine trial unfolded behind heavy barred doors, its rigid formality, a grim farce conducted under lantern glow and whispered threats. The plantation's survivors, including Sarah and Elijah, stood accused not of love, but of insurrection. Their fates balanced precariously between law and vengeance, in a world where justice bowed to fear and control. The cold, echoing clang of the courtroom's iron bars was a harsh counterpoint to the soft pleas and muted sobs within. How does justice endure when weaponized by oppression's hand? The atmosphere thickened with dread, the low murmur of fearful spectators juxtaposed against stifled cries from the accused. The judge's voice cut through the heavy air like cold iron, dispensing verdicts that were less about truth than deterrence. Witnesses offered fragmented testimony, some forced, others whispered, with overseers' harsh stares silencing any flicker of sympathy. Every word, every sentence, weighed like chains on the hearts of the condemned. Could law truly serve justice, or was it merely the final instrument of subjugation? Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the sentence sealed a terrifying fate. Bodies broken, spirits crushed, freedoms forever stolen. Yet even as the gavel fell, a quieter defiance stirred beneath the surface. Resistance whispered still in clenched fists and unyielding gazes. The texture of worn wooden benches, rough and cold beneath trembling limbs, seemed to hold silent testimonies of courage and pain alike. Would their sacrifice inspire a future reckoning, or become another buried chapter in a ledger destined to silence them? Outside, the plantation held its breath, the oppressive silence broken only by distant thunder, echoing the storm within. The trial's shadow cast long and dark across the fields, a grim reminder that the wheels of fear would grind slow but relentless. The night swallowed the condemned, yet in shadows where law ended, memory and defiance began. What becomes of justice when it blinds itself to mercy? In this grim theater beneath the weight of night, the final act was yet unfinished. The aftermath of rebellion carved deep wounds in flesh and spirit as iron instruments of punishment marked bodies with brutal finality. Each clang of shackles and the harsh rasping scrape of iron braces echoed the unforgiving will of a system desperate to reassert control. The texture of cold, unyielding metal against scorched, weary skin was a cruel reminder that resistance exacted a high and visible price. Blood, fresh and congealed, traced tragic maps across bruised flesh, a haunting testimony to the intersection of love, defiance, and merciless reprisal. Sarah's body bore the indelible imprint of punishment. Rough-hewn hands tightened around, splintered wood as waves of pain passed like thunderclaps beneath ragged breaths. Medicine of the time offered little relief, soothing balms were rare, and often cruelty masqueraded as care. The sharp tang of iron mixed with the acrid sting of sweat and dirt, forging a sensory landscape, where suffering and survival intertwined inseparably. Through the physical torment, the will beneath remained unbroken, even as restraint sought to swallow spirit whole. For many, punishment was not merely physical, but a calculated spectacle. Bloodied bodies made symbols of warning, the clink of irons a dreary lullaby for the enslaved quarters. The scarred flesh told stories no law could erase, a morbid ledger scribed in pain and endurance. Would these marks of cruelty forge deeper chains or ignite a lasting ember of resistance? Each rasping breath and defiant glance answered in the language of survival. Against iron's cold embrace, love's resilience shimmered faint but unyielding, bound in blood and memory. In the shadows, whispered accounts and quiet prayers bore witness to those broken and those who bore witness without yielding. The iron clasped tightly around bodies was rivaled only by the strength of the spirit unbound, an unspoken promise that neither rope nor bloodlust could fully claim. What weight do scars carry when etched not just upon skin, but embedded in history's enduring fabric? In this crucible of iron and blood, the human cost of defiance became a solemn testament to a struggle far from over. Thunder rolled low across the darkened skies, as if the heavens themselves mourned the turbulent legacy left behind by rebellion. The plantation fields lay scorched and silent, heavy with the scent of smoke and rain, an eerie stillness that belied the storm within. Weather mirroring emotion, the relentless fall of rain washed the earth, but could not cleanse the scars embedded deep in bone and memory. How could one reckon with a loss so violent, yet so defiant, when the very skies seemed to tremble with grief? The tempest unfolded like a cruel echo of the struggle below. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the stark contrasts of fate, a world torn between oppression's iron grasp and the fragile sparks of hope burning in hidden places. The wind carried whispers of those lost and those left behind, their stories swirling like leaves in the rising gale. The texture of cold rain on scorched flesh was a brutal reminder that despair and resilience marched hand in hand, both carved into the land's dark vein. Would the storm cleanse or only deepen the wounds? Beneath the roar of thunder, the plantation's shadow lingered, a grim testament to cycles of suffering and resistance repeated through generations. The unyielding force of nature stood witness to promises broken and bonds unbroken, where memory fought erasure at every turn. The power of weather as metaphor stretched beyond the immediate, folding history's weight into the present moment. How does one carry the burden of such legacy when the storm clears, but the echoes persist? In this haunting solitude, love's flicker persisted, a beacon trembling yet undimmed, a solemn vow embraced beneath the storm's fury. The fierce pulse of rebellion and passion, intertwined like wind and rain, defied simple endings. This was no quiet surrender, but a testament carved in storm and ash, a testament that the winds of change, though slow and shrouded, carried with them the restless spirit of those who dared to hope beyond the darkest tempests. The smoldering ruins of the plantation receded beneath a dawn, soaked in muted gray, a solemn witness to loss carved in ash and memory. Yet beneath the heavy sky, a resilient pulse beat faint but unyielding, an ember of love and defiance refusing to be fully extinguished. Sarah and Elijah's union, though shattered in flesh, lived on in whispered stories carried on wind and woven through the hearts of those who survived. What does it mean to remain unshackled when every chain still clinks in the shadows? In the quiet aftermath, families separated by fire and fear sought each other through fractured landscapes, the texture of worn earth and tangled underbrush their reluctant map. The ropes that once bound now lay coiled in dying embers, symbols both of captivity and the potential for release. Their love had become legend, a secret anthem sung in embers and ashes, a fierce testament that even in erasure, bonds endure. Would that love inspire future resistance, or fade into the quiet corners of forgotten history? Communities battered by violence bore the weight of trauma, yet clung fiercely to memory. Oral histories folded into the fabric of survival. In fleeting moments of grace, stolen songs, shared meals, the gentlest touch, hope flickered on like a fragile flame, stubborn against the wind. The legacy Sarah and Elijah left was not only in their sacrifice, but in the unyielding spirit passed down. A call to remember that love could transcend law, pain, and death. What kind of freedom is born from the ashes of oppression, and how does love transform the enduring struggle?